Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Alo me ming la wa shin. We will go ahead and get started now. Thank you for joining us, the Myanmar Institute of Directors. My name is Thiri Tamun, and I'm the CEO, and I have the pleasure of welcoming all of you today on a rainy afternoon in Yangon. I hope you have sunnier weather over in Singapore, where our speakers are joining from. So my job is really just to introduce, and those of you who've been waiting with us, getting into the webinar early, already read the bios, so I won't do a very long introduction, but I did want to start with thanking Ferdinand de Bakker, whom I will introduce first, for making this webinar happen. Amongst other things, Ferry has been a big supporter of the Myanmar Institute of Directors personally, as well as through the Singapore Institute of Directors, where he is a council member. And Ferry is a long-term communications professional who has had a variety of roles, as well as a board member. And he also teaches in Singapore, and I'm going to get the university right, at the Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. And with that organization, there was a report written by Mr. de Bakker titled Recharging Employee Engagement, Management and Communication Synergy. If you haven't had a chance to read it, the link for that is in the brochure of this webinar, so please do read it, but you will have the opportunity to get the first-hand excerpts being delivered to you by Ferry later on. So that's what we will start with the title Employee Engagement in Disruptive Times, and we do live in disruptive times at the moment. And in particular, this being the Institute of Directors, we're looking at the role of the leadership, the board of directors, as well as the CEO, HR director, and the communications directors on how to keep employees engaged. And employees, of course, for most, if not all organizations, are the most important asset. And we're also delighted and very fortunate to have Ms. Marieke van Raaij, who is the Regional Employee Engagement Solutions Leader for AMEA Pacific and LATAM at Mercer. And Mercer has done specific work in Myanmar, for which is an extensive study for which Marieke will be discussing and presenting the findings of as well. So there's a global qualitative study as well as local research studies, of which Myanmar is one market. So there will be conclusions and recommendations. So we will take about 15 to 20 minutes for each of our presenters, and then there should be time, about 15 minutes at the end for questions. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to put it in chat, and we will take them if the flow of the conversation is appropriate. We'll take them as they come, or we'll address them at the end. So please go ahead and put those in chat as you are listening. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Ferdinand de Bakker to share us his presentation, please. Thank you, Ferry.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you. Very honored to have been invited to share, some of the findings of the research projects that we were engaged in the second half of last year. And Sue, if you can get me the next slide, I can start what I wish to share with you. Okay, so this research is qualitative. We were not looking for percentages. We were looking for best practice and for worst practice when it comes to employee engagement, and in particular, employee engagement in difficult times. So it was done as part of a program that we run. It's a Master of Media and Communication program. So I had the support of 20 of my students, and we were, very fortunate to have been able to collaborate on this project with two leading firms. One is Edelman, which is the world's, largest and still also independent public relations and communications consultancy, and Mercer, which is part of Marsh McLennan, and Mercer, is by all means the #1 HR consulting firm. Interestingly enough, some of the people that I have interviewed, one in the United States and another one, well, actually one in the New York area and another one in Hawaii, which had excellent employee engagement programs. And it was only, right at the end of the interview when I became aware of the fact that they had been clients and were clients of Mercer. So that proves that the company is indeed known, for its outstanding work. So we interviewed 50 people. Personally, I did 31. And unlike what usually happens in research projects, each of these 31 interviews that I did, provided new insights. It was really quite amazing. Normally, after about 10 interviews, I roughly know what's going to happen and what people are going to say. So the duration of the interviews decreases, but in this case, it was not at all true. 22 of the 50 were directors of communication. 13 were HR directors, and 15 were, CEOs or COOs. They come from all parts in the world, and both as individuals and the positions that they held, as well as the headquarters of the companies. 17 were headquartered in Asia Pacific, 15 in Europe, and 18 in North America. So if I can have Sue, the next slide. I would like to start with, some of the important findings. First of all, what was important for us was the question, who owns employee engagement? And often it is the CEO who drives this. And there are CEOs who are known for their, for their passionate role in driving employee engagement in their organizations. And this is the way it's supposed to be. However, it can also go wrongly when the CEO retires and is replaced by someone else. So as an example, one of the interviews was with the COO of one of the world's leading hotel chains, who told me that his current CEO, who was new, used to be the chief financial officer. And unlike his predecessor, this chief financial officer, now CEO, had absolutely zero interest in employee engagement. He said, that's something that you and your colleagues can take care of. I just don't want to be involved in this. So, and that, that immediately, has repercussions for how, employee engagement is viewed by the people for who we do this, the employees themselves. So, but in most cases, the CEO is the driving force. The programs are managed by the HR department, often in collaboration with the communications department. And a number of cases, I've seen situations where specific units were set up to manage employee engagement with professionals from both departments. For example, Unilever is one of those companies. If you have a passionate CEO who drives this, you can get a long way when it comes to the required support of employees. And the most outstanding example of that is something you can find on TED.com or on actually probably easier on YouTube. It's a gentleman who at the time last year was the CEO of the Marriott Hotel Group. And this was not the group that I was referring to, by the way, just now, but it's a different hotel group. So this name is Arne Sørensen. And although he was not well physically, he suffered from, a very aggressive cancer. He stayed on his post for as long as he could. And his speech to the employees of the Marriott Hotel is just completely outstanding. Unfortunately, he passed away a few months ago. An interesting completely different approach we found in one of Singapore's leading banks. When we asked the question, who drives employee engagement and who runs it, the answer was the employees themselves. I thought this was very interesting because in this way, employees have ownership of how they should be treated and what they can contribute to their employers. And if you have ownership, better things can happen to the benefit of both parties. So boards of directors and independent directors should take a very close look to make sure that in employee engagement, particularly in turbulent times, everything is in place, to have the company continue to run as best as it can. And we're talking about turbulent times. And there certainly are turbulent times in your country, but let's not forget you're not the only country where this is the case. If we go around the world quickly, I think of Hong Kong, Thailand nearby, Brazil, the Ukraine, Syria, Lebanon. Actually, it's a long list of countries where companies have to deal, with, very significant disruption and often not just one, but multiple ones. So that's why employee engagement, which, by all research, using all of the available research on, what it, how it benefits organizations, is so incredibly important. So I'd like to go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the basics. First of all, that digital transformation in companies has become very, very quickly a necessity. Yeah, there is no escaping it. And it has proven to be a gigantic help for CEOs, C-suites, communication professionals, and HR professionals to see digital transformation in their company speed up so that they can do their employee engagement programs in a better way. Secondly, purpose. Like if you go like 10 years ago, probably not many people would have thought about it. And today it is not only a buzzword, it has become, a core business philosophy. Why are we doing what we are doing? This is extremely important now, and it's something that employees, all over the world want to know. Why is this company doing what it is doing? Another thing we found was that the old-fashioned employee surveys that were sent around the world, and sometimes say in the case of companies like Unilever or Shell, with over 100,000 employees, and in some cases take Accenture with over 500,000 employees. To do these gigantic surveys once a year, that has changed. It's now done differently. Sometimes it's still part of it. Most of the times I see that companies do much more focused, smaller scale surveys where the outcomes and the action that is taken by management can have a direct and immediate impact on the way business is conducted. Then communication is so important that it's often forgotten, but let's not forget, communication makes employee engagement success or fail. And we already know that communication makes mergers and acquisitions succeed or fail. So, and what we have seen and heard from the people we interviewed is that this is now being recognized in the C-suite. Secondly, employees have done an incredible job by and large in all parts of the world in keeping their companies where they are employed afloat and to keep them successful as much as they can. And I wonder if that is acknowledged widely enough by enough companies, the fact that employees have gone out of their way to work under difficult circumstances. So boards of directors make sure you are aware of what's going on in employee engagement, what the trends are, how it's best conducted, what the role of consultants can be. The same goes for digital transformation, and this part, also underscores the importance of board diversity. A board with good diversity will be able to have people who know about each of these topics, rather than if you have people who are all have the same background, age, and experience. Okay, so those are the basics. Now I want to talk about culture, and I want to talk about some of the mistakes that we continue to make as human beings. So Sue, can I have the next slide? Okay, so this slide is called Will We Ever Learn? And it has two components. One is that we have seen that there are still companies, it's hard to believe that in this day of age, still make the same mistakes that mainly US companies made in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, as they were in 80s and 90s, as they were spreading out their wings around the world, by not realizing that different countries and different people have different cultures, and that you cannot just change that. To give you one example of the famous consulting firm of McKinsey, who in its mission statement that was used in the 1990s, listed as some of the values that their consultants had the obligation to dissent if their clients did things that they thought were wrong. That works very well, but not in Japan. So I remember the case of one of probably America's largest company at the time, Walmart, who acquired in the 1990s 2 huge supermarkets in Germany, and then immediately tried to turn them into Walmarts, not in name, but in culture. For example, by enforcing German employees to sing the Walmart song every morning when they get to work. Boys, girls, this is just not working. Nowadays, we see, like an expansion of China and Chinese companies. And there are ample examples of companies that make the same mistake. I do not understand why this is the case. However, there are also ones that do an incredible job. If you look at the case study in Harvard Business Review of Geely, which bought the Volvo, Swedish company. There's an example of a Chinese management fully understanding that cultures are different and not fighting it, but trying to accommodate the people that they have just acquired. Also, the Zitian aircraft industry, acquired 10 years ago an Austrian components company, and did the same thing. Absolutely terrific way of acquiring a company and taking good care of the culture. But as I said, there are many examples, way too many, of companies and management that make mistakes, in this very, very important part of employee engagement, which is culture. Secondly, it is, in retrospect, astonishing that the world, governments and companies were not prepared for the pandemic. The World Bank, the WHO, and Bill Gates himself in 2015, if you take a look at the TED Talk, warned for this. And Forbes, in May 2020, published an article written by scientists that, warned that an entirely new form of influenza may kill up to 1 to 2 billion people. And who's prepared for this kind of stuff? Singapore, for example, and Hong Kong were reasonably well prepared because the experience they had in 2003 with SARS. But the world and many countries, particularly in Africa, are still not being able to deal with the HIV/AIDS pandemic. as evidenced by the fact that 25% of women in South Africa, still are HIV positive. Companies really, really need to do better when it comes to preparing for the future. So that gets me to the next slide, which is, the astonishment that I had when, interviewing all these senior executives. And listen, this was like done, from August till October of last year. And practically everyone was completely certain what the future of work looked like. And I thought, how on earth can you know this? We've only been here in this position for 6, 7, 8 months. To say now that this is the way work is going to look like in the future, I think is very bad thinking and very bad management. Instead, I would encourage these people to become much more serious about risk management and about scenario development, and to try this out, before changes, disruptions actually happen. And here, the role of the board of directors is very important. They should question the CEO about this. They should encourage hiring external experts, and they should take immediate action, because you never know when the next problem is going to arrive at your door. So my final slide, talks a little bit about the extra dimensions of turbulent times. What we have learned above all is that real leadership, on the part of individuals, no matter in what position they are in companies, really, really counts. Also, to know that we're all in the same boat, the COVID-19 pandemic is something we all have to deal with. And we can use this, companies can use this to their advantage. It's just as Unilever, as an example, has taken advantage of cultural differences rather than having been able to just manage them. So, and then number 2, number 3, and number 4 is top quality communication can really make or break what you are doing. And finally, how employees have been treated and are treated, during turbulent times will not be forgotten. And if you have done the right things, that will be to your advantage. But if companies have done not so, then they will face the consequences later on. Boards of directors offer advice, support, keep track of what's going on. Don't take over management yourself. And, and finally, and most importantly of all, particularly towards employees, be kind to them. So that is what I wanted to share with you. And, it's not for nothing that my final words about employees and employee engagement, because after all, it's employees that make companies and that make organizations work. So this is the right moment to hand over to Marieke to share her insights with you. So thank you for your attention to what I had to share with you.
Thanks, Ferry. That's great. I mean, I'm kind of tempted to pause for questions, but I guess I'll do my piece, and then we'll have time for the Q&A and so on. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Delighted to be able to share some findings. Let me just get my screen share going. So yes, as described, I'm working within Mercer, based here in Singapore, and really focusing on employee engagement and employee listening. So that's often the big bad surveys that Ferry described, or smaller listening, more tighter topics and so on. And I'm just going to share some three main themes that we're going to talk about, really focusing on COVID, its effect on the business. And here I'm able to bring in a bit of data from Myanmar based on our remuneration surveys. But the bulk of what I'll focus on really is around the employee experience, and then trying to touch upon the best way forward. I think, I've got sort of 12 to 15 minutes, so clearly it's going to be a little bit of a light touch on each of these things, but hopefully give you some good nuggets of information to take away with you. So in terms of the business, you know, I really like this quote, and it really echoes what Ferry was saying as well about that digital transformation. In many ways, COVID has been an accelerant. You know, it's forced us to do things that would otherwise have taken us, you know, many years, decades even perhaps to get to. So the idea that, you know, one day we're all set up to be working from home, for a consultant, actually, that's always been the way that we've worked. But, you know, for many other industries, that's been a long way away, you know, from the sort of business as usual. And then I just wanted to touch upon some of the specific data from Myanmar. Oh, sorry. This is the Mercer's remuneration survey that took place during the first quarter of this year. We surveyed 77 organisations, 13,500 employees across 664 job types. And on the right, you can see the industry. So, you know, reasonably good spread across those industries with consumer goods, high tech, and logistics being the bigger categories. So this first slide is probably not going to shake your world, but I do think it's very interesting, these numbers that we're coming here. So 88% of those 77 organisations stated yes, it did. You know, the pandemic has had a moderate or high impact. And I think that's not a surprise. You know, we expect to have seen this across many organisations. What I found quite interesting, you know, digging through the survey data in a bit more detail, is where we saw the impacts. So this is focused in HR budget allocation. So this data is coming from, you know, the same survey, and we're asking people where their budget allocations were most affected. And so we've ranked from the most reduced, so travel budgets, possibly not a surprise, recruitment budgets are reduced, employee salaries, and around some reduction in benefits such as home office equipment and so on. But again, you know, what's quite interesting, you know, some things maintained pretty stable. You know, there was very little change in, you know, welfare amenities, for example. And so there's a sort of mixture between a very sort of stable impact on budgets as well as some large impacts. I really wanted to share a little bit more of the Myanmar data. You know, there's absolutely a ton of data around, you know, salaries and so on, but I wanted to focus a little bit on COVID specifically, and this is around supporting remote workers. So a very straightforward question, you know, does your organisation provide financial support? So you can see the minority actually agreeing to that. Yes, they do. And is the financial support paid out? Yeah, generally as a lump sum. And the final interesting bit around here is, you know, what it's really paid out for. So you can see, you know, the most times that somebody was compensated for the working at home shift has been around internet services, technology, and then a little bit around office equipment and computer equipment and so on. So, you know, quite a granular set of information, and really I wanted to just kind of give you a glimpse of some of this data that we're collecting across our different markets. Within Myanmar specifically, you know, perhaps some of you even contributed to this survey, and this data is available. You know, we can certainly share that with you if you'd like to dig into other elements of it. But the bit that I really wanted to focus on, you know, beyond the kind of financial or business impacts of COVID was around the employee experience. And before we jump into this is the point actually I'm going to get a little bit of audience participation. So I hope you're all ready. You can please take your mobile phone if you have it near you, or you can type into your browser, the www.menti.com. So it's just a quick quiz, a quick data gathering that we're going to do with you. So please have a go at logging in. Let me know on the chat, or just shout out if you have any problems coming in. And when you get in there, you'll be asked to enter this code 54430997, and you'll see the first question there. So we talk about employee experience, we're talking about engagement. You know, what do we mean by engaged employees? So I'm asking you just to populate a couple of words. What jumps to mind when you think about an engaged employee? Just going to switch my screens. Share screen. So you should now start seeing this word cloud as if by magic populating in front of you. And so it's taking the inputs that you're providing and you know, populating here. So motivated, committed, productive, happy, energized, genuine interest in work. Yeah, so some great inputs here. Happy. The organizational psychologists have a field day when we compare happy versus engaged. But yep, this is all good stuff. Okay, great. So I think the committed, motivated, productive, you know, these are the words that are appearing the most. That's why they have the largest size font. But people are still voting. On the bottom right there, you can see 31 votes. And within the call, I believe we had about 70 participants. So let me just give you a few more minutes for those that are still trying to log in. In case you've lost track of the code, it's up here at the top as well, 5443. Okay, great, thank you. So I think, you know, some sort of cohesion around this view, around being productive, motivated, happy, and committed. I'll move on to the next question. So stick with your phones, please. And then very easy question, perhaps. Does your organization measure employee engagement? So yes, no, or perhaps don't know. I like the not sure. I assume if you're not sure, there's not a huge song and dance made about the measurements of engagement. So we have about 32 votes again, the majority about 20, so 2/3 of people working in an organization that's measuring employee engagement in some form or other. That's great, you know, and I'd love to, we'll touch upon this a little bit more as we move through. The final one is a little bit different. I'm asking you, who said this? The only way to do great work is to love what you do. So you see, I've got on a tech theme here on the bottom. Let's see. Elon Musk is creeping in with a vote there after all. I wondered if he was gonna not score a single vote. So, Jack Ma and Steve Jobs, it's getting to be quite a close race here. 37 votes. Okay, we'll cap it at that. And narrowly, the Steve Jobs vote wins, which was in fact correct. That is something that he said. I do find it interesting because, you know, Jack Ma also strikes me as somebody who's very dynamic and passionate. So I think it's interesting that it's reflected there as well. And then, you know, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. Is that true? You know, can we do great work, you know, without perhaps completely being in love with what we do? I wonder if you could use your reaction button at the bottom there, just to give me a thumbs up if you agree with this statement. So let me get my little gallery of people. Let's see how many thumbs up we get for agreeing. Do you have to love what you do to do a great job? Thea, thank you for your vote. There's a few people thumbs up there. A double thumbs up from Ferdinand. Oh, Ferry, you got your hand up and a thumbs up? Okay, super, thank you for that. You know, and again, you know, I'm not going to say that I've got the answer whether or not you need to love what you do. I think certainly it makes life easier and more pleasant if you go to work loving what you do, and possibly you're able to do a better job. But the reason I bring all that up is, you know, there's stuff there about, you know, what's engagement, stuff there about, you know, do I have to be happy? Do I love what I do? And so just briefly, the way that Mercer describes engaged employees is these three components. So being committed to the organization, contributing, and this sense of captivation. So the committing is wanting to stay and feeling passionate, the contributing about motivated to help the organization succeed, and captivated around feeling energized in the work that you do and your contributions that you give. So let me share some data. This is engagement levels. The pink and the purple line is the global and APAC scores. So they're the same as each other in this case. So 77% of the employees that we survey globally and within APAC are very, we would consider them engaged. They're positive on that sort of contributing, captivated, and so on. So I'm so sorry that Myanmar is not a data point here. Unfortunately, we don't have enough data within Myanmar to be able to present this. Perhaps in years to come we can. But I still did want to show this because there's a huge variation you can see across these countries in APAC. You know, from Philippines to Japan, you know, 20 percentage points difference. And this brings a little bit of an echo of, you know, Ferry's point around culture, you know, not understanding where it is that you're working and, you know, what the culture is, the way that people respond to these kind of survey questions, really makes a big impact in the way that we work as well. So Philippines, clearly, you know, generally more positive, and then through to sort of Hong Kong and Japan and the other end of that. Taking a look at some COVID specific data, this is, bringing in the COVID timeframe, this is global data. Again, looking at the engagement elements, so these kind of aspects of engagement. And what we found very interesting from sort of 2019 through to the COVID years, which I really hope we're not going to call them that forever, you know, we'll find something greater that happened. But you can see some general lifts in each of these elements. So pride, motivation, advocacy, so the willingness to recommend the organisation, and commitment and so on. So it's really interesting to see that, you know, despite the difficulties and perhaps because of the difficulties, there's been this kind of cohesion of positivity around engagement. And we would like to suggest as well that some of that is driven through this sense of support that employees have felt. So again, this is some global data. 91% of the employees that we surveyed had the information they need to keep healthy and safe. The organisation, 82% taking the right steps to support. You know, 79%, my organisation's good job communicating. And 77%, I'm satisfied with the way my organisation is handling the pandemic. So I think, you know, the organisations where we've been able to see employees' engagement levels either maintaining or going up, it's often been very highly linked with the communications and the support that they've had from their organisations, from their employers. But, you know, it's without a doubt, you know, we've all been facing a bunch of stressors. This is not my house, but it could be. You know, there have been days that I want to just tie my children to the floor so that I can get on with my work. Perhaps I should replace this with a more appropriate Mercer imaging of this dad doing it in a slightly more humane way. But just, you know, thinking about some of these stresses, things around working parents, losing productivity due to having to take care of the kids and the stress of that. And I laugh, you know, I've got 2 kids at home and my husband's at home, and I would love to spend a weekend in an empty apartment. But, you know, I wouldn't want to be locked in an empty apartment for the entire months of quarantine or, you know, self-isolation. And obviously, you know, that loneliness has been very difficult for some people. Gen Z specifically worried about the future of their jobs and their careers. Baby boomers more specifically worried about physical health and financial well-being. And then there's a lot of really interesting data around the male-female split. So female managers, this double shift, I think this is a term coined by Sheryl Sandberg and her Lean In Foundation. So that the idea of doing a shift at home and a shift at work, resulting in stress, of course, and difficulty to manage. And that's displayed really nicely in this one of these last bits of data. So considering the circumstances, I feel reasonably balanced and healthy. So you can see the male employees, yeah, it's tailing off a little bit. The male managers, sort of the grey bar, it's okay. You know, the female employees, that's tailed off a little bit, you know, going as the months progress. But you just see this really big drop off for the female managers. So feeling able to balance and to take care of their health seems to be specifically impacting female managers. And of course, you know, this has some really interesting impacts for organizations, you know, how you demonstrate that care to different demographics within your organization. The other thing I find really interesting, of course, is that the stresses vary. I mean, if we look at some organizations that had increased demand, you know, business was booming for them during COVID, you know, they were worried about physical safety and being burnt out. You know, where your industry was suffering, you were worried about probably job security and being isolated. And sorry, and the other sides of those is around remote work and on-site work. So with remote work, you know, at one point the novelty started to wear off, and it started to make things quite challenging for people. You know, personally, I'm dying to get back into the office and have a bit of a water cooler banter with my colleagues. And for those that are able to go on site, you know, wearing a mask all the time can be a hassle. Social distancing can be difficult. You know, some people are actually, of course, worried about falling sick and the implications. So I think for organizations as well to understand that the stresses vary according to who you are, where you sit, what you're doing, and also, of course, by those demographic elements that I mentioned. So the last piece that I'm going to just touch upon quite quickly is around the more flexible future. So again, drawing some data from one of Mercer's surveys, we asked people how important is flexibility to you? And you can see the vast majority, you know, the more than half over there, and the 56%, and the vast majority finding it either very or somewhat important, is to have that flexibility. So even to the extent of considering switching employees if it wasn't possible for me to work flexibly. So there's a real call out there, and you can see that point at the bottom, that importance ranked even more for millennials and Gen X, you know, really seeing the importance of being able to work flexibly. So what is the way forward? And I think, you know, our conclusion as well is that there's no one size fits all. We've just put some logos here just to kind of bring this to life a bit. But, you know, Netflix, they announced plans, the CEO announced plans that employees would be expected to come back to work once the vaccine's available. So they're really sort of feeling this office-driven culture. Microsoft, much more around hybrid, allowing employees to work remotely 50% of the week or less and needing to get managerial approval. Facebook, slightly different, expecting people to work remotely, and then really looking at a distributed model, so people working remotely across the US and wider. And then Dropbox, completely the other side of things, looking at being completely remote, you know, closing a lot of their office spaces, converting to studios, which would be focused on communication and collaboration. So really, you know, so we're seeing a lot of differences. And I think that the sort of message that we would like to draw out as we think of all this data and thoughts and observations that I've shared, is this in these times, you know, we think that dialogue of listening and focusing on specific topics is really, really critical. You know, people are feeling lonely or disconnected or you know, left out of the loop. And so having a sort of formal listening strategy where their views can really be taken on board, they have the chance to get things off your chest and so on. And we've listed those benefits there. But to, you know, one of the points Ferry made as well, you know, from being very focused in our listening strategy. So we do still run big engagement surveys that cover a whole bunch of topics. But what we seem to be doing a lot more of now is looking at these three sort of categories, the immediate threats. So, you know, how are you feeling in terms of burnout? You know, what's your intention to stay or go? Around the employee experience, that has a lot to do with culture, diversity, equity and inclusion, well-being, flexible work. And then around the future of work, which is, you know, what skills do we need? What jobs will be there in the future? What will the leadership look like? And the future employee contract, which I also find very interesting, you know, being much more reciprocal. You know, what's in it for me? What's in it for you as an employer? So, you know, certainly we think employee listening is alive and well, thank goodness. And the way we're doing it is slightly changed over time. However, the insights and the ability for organizations to take the insights and then create meaningful action, you know, remains really, really powerful. So that's actually my last slide. Let me stop my share and I think pass back to Theory, I believe.
Thank you so much, Marieke, and thank you, Ferry, for the presentation earlier.